You've cost me enough. Starting today, you go with this beggar. Please don't do this. Over a pizza? Does a pizza look like a joke to you? Now get out!
She was sold for a pizza box. Not $100, not a mansion. A single, greasy pizza box, and the man holding it out wasn't the beggar everyone in that house thought he was. He was the most feared name in Seoul's underworld, and nobody in that kitchen had any idea what they'd just done. Before we get into it, I want you to sit with that for a second. If your own family looked at you and decided you were worth less than dinner, what would you do? Drop a comment and tell me, and while you're at it, let me know what city you're watching this from tonight, because I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to the beginning, because none of this made sense yet. Not to Folake, not to anyone. The Bankel house never slept quietly, but Folake was always the first one awake in it. Before the sun cracked over the rooftops of the estate, she was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hands moving on instinct, because her body had memorized this routine long before her heart ever agreed to it. She wasn't paid for any of it. She wasn't even thanked for it. But she did it anyway, because the alternative, sitting still long enough to remember what this house used to feel like before her father died, was worse. This had been his home. Adebio Bankel had built it plank by plank, deal by deal, out of nothing but stubbornness and a good name. When he was alive, the halls used to smell like plantain frying on a Saturday morning, and his laugh used to carry through every room like it owned the place. When he died, the laughter didn't just fade, it got locked out entirely, replaced by his second wife's cold instructions and her daughter's smirking silence. Comfort Bankel never once called Folake her daughter. She called her the girl. She said it the way you'd talk about furniture, useful, forgettable, replaceable. And her real daughter, Zainab, had learned to sharpen that same tone into something crueler, something that enjoyed the sting a little too much. Folake kept one thing that neither of them could touch: a photograph of her father tucked inside her apron, soft at the corners from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Some mornings, before the house woke up, she'd take it out just to remember what it felt like to be someone's daughter instead of someone's help. She didn't get long that morning. Comfort's voice cut through the kitchen like a slammed door. Folake, not a question, never a question, just a command wrapped in her name. Folake slid the photo back into her pocket and answered the way she always did, quick, quiet, careful. Yes, ma'am. What she didn't know yet was that by tonight, every single thing about her life was going to change, and there'd be no going back to this kitchen, this apron, or this version of herself ever again. Comfort was standing at the gate with Zainab beside her, and there was a man on the other side of it, Korean, tall, wrapped in a coat that had clearly seen better decades, carrying nothing but a paper bag that smelled faintly of grease. He looked like exactly what everyone assumed he was, somebody with nowhere else to be. Folake had seen men like him near the market before, the kind people crossed the street to avoid. What she hadn't seen before was her stepmother inviting one of them through the gate like an honored guest. "This is the girl," Comfort said, resting a hand on Folake's shoulder, a gesture so unfamiliar it froze her in place faster than the words did. The man studied Folake for a long, unreadable moment. Then he reached into the paper bag and pulled out a pizza box, still faintly warm, and held it out toward Comfort like it was the most natural transaction in the world. Comfort took it, opened the lid just enough to glance inside, extra cheese, exactly as promised, and smiled like she'd just closed the deal of her life. Folake looked at the pizza box, then at her stepmother's face, then at the stranger who hadn't said a single word since he'd stepped through the gate. "You've cost me enough," Comfort said, and her voice didn't even shake. "Starting today, you go with him." For a second, the words simply refused to land. Folake searched her stepmother's expression for the joke, the twist, the moment where this turned out to be some ugly test she was failing on purpose. There wasn't one. "You're joking," she whispered. Comfort's eyes didn't blink. "Does a pizza look like a joke to you?" And that was the moment Folake understood, not through anger, but through something colder, that whatever came next, she was walking into it with a single travel bag, a stranger's silence, and absolutely no idea that the man beside her wasn't running from anything. He was the one everyone else in this city ran from. The walk away from the Bangkok estate felt longer than it should have. Folake kept her bag pressed against her chest like it was the only solid thing left in the world, and the man beside her walked in total silence, hands in his coat pockets, eyes forward, like he'd done this exact walk 100 times before, and it had stopped meaning anything to him a long time ago. She broke first. Why me? Nothing. You had money for pizza, and you didn't have anywhere to sleep, but you paid for me. Her voice cracked on the last word before she could stop it. Why? He didn't slow down, because you needed somewhere to go. It wasn't the answer she wanted. She'd braced herself for cruelty, for some ugly reason that would at least make sense of the last hour. Instead, she got 6 words and a stranger who wouldn't even look at her when he said them. They turned down a narrow street lined with buildings that had clearly seen better years, and he stopped in front of a modest 2-story house tucked behind a rusted gate, nothing like the mansion she'd just walked out of, but clean, deliberate, cared for in a way that didn't match the man's ragged coat at all. He noticed her hesitating at the gate. You can leave if you want, he said. I'm not going to stop you. You bought me, why would you let me leave? I didn't buy you to keep you. For the first time, something almost like patience crossed his face. I told you already, you needed somewhere to go, that's all this is. She looked back down the street she'd just come from. There was nowhere else to go, no cousin, no friend, no address in this city that wasn't the one she'd just been thrown out of. So she stepped through the gate. Inside, the house was small, but nothing like she expected from a man everyone in the market whispered about like he was contagious. There were books stacked in careful order, a kettle sitting on the stove like it got used every single day, a single framed photo, face down, on a shelf by the window, the kind of thing you only turn over when you're ready to look at it, and clearly he wasn't. You can have the room upstairs, he said. I'll take the cooch. You don't even know me. I know you didn't ask for any of this. He set the paper bag with the leftover pizza slices on the counter. That's enough for tonight. He told her his name was Jihoon. Nothing more, no last name, no explanation for the way strangers on the street had glanced at him twice on the walk over before quickly looking away, like they'd recognized a face they were supposed to forget seeing. Folake noticed it. She just didn't ask. The days that followed didn't feel like captivity. They felt like something closer to peace, which confused her more than anything else could have. Jihoon left before sunrise most mornings and came back well after dark, always vague about where he'd been, always careful about which questions he'd actually answer. He never once brought up the pizza, or the deal, or the fact that technically, by every twisted definition, he owned her now. He just made sure there was food on the table, and never asked her for anything in return. She found a part-time job folding laundry at a shop 2 streets over, small money, but hers, earned with her own hands, and that alone felt like the first thing she'd owned in years that comfort couldn't take credit for. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. And somewhere in the quiet routine of it, tea in the mornings, his rare half-smiles when she said something that actually made him laugh, the strange comfort of being under a roof where no one screamed her name like an insult, Folake realized she was no longer just staying because she had nowhere else to go. She was staying because she didn't want to leave. But there were things about Jihoon that didn't add up, no matter how much she tried to explain them away. The way certain men on the street straightened up when he walked past, like soldiers catching sight of an officer. The black car that idled 2 blocks from the house some nights, never approaching, just watching. The scar along his knuckles that he never explained and she'd learned not to ask about. One evening, a delivery boy dropped off a package addressed to a name she'd never heard him use. Not Jihoon, something else entirely, followed by a title that made the boy's hands shake slightly as he passed it over. Folake looked at the name on the box long after the boy had gone. She didn't know yet what it meant, but she knew, with a cold certainty settling into her chest, that the man sleeping on the couch downstairs was not who he'd let her believe he was, and whatever the truth actually was, it was about to come looking for both of them. The name on that package stayed with Folek for days. She didn't ask Jihoon about it. Some part of her already sensed that asking would only get her a silence sharper than the one he usually gave her, and she wasn't ready to lose the fragile peace they'd built over a name she didn't understand yet. But peace, it turned out, wasn't hers to keep for long. It started small. A man she didn't recognize began appearing near the laundry shop where she worked, always a little too far away to approach, always gone by the time she looked twice. Then it was a car, not the black sedan that sometimes idled near the house at night, but a different one, older, parked across from the gate for hours at a time with a driver who never got out. She mentioned it to Jihoon over dinner, trying to sound calmer than she felt. There's a man watching the shop, and a car outside almost every night now. His jaw tightened, just slightly, the kind of reaction he probably thought she wouldn't catch, except she'd spent 2 months learning every version of his silence, and this one was new. This one was worry. "Stay inside after dark this week," he said, "please." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now." She wanted to push harder, but something about the way he said right now, like there was a version of the truth waiting just past a door he wasn't ready to open yet, made her let it go. For the moment. It was Mrs. Han, the elderly woman who ran the tiny grocery at the end of the street, who finally cracked the silence without meaning to. Folek had stopped in for rice, and the old woman studied her for a long moment before speaking, like she'd been waiting for the right customer to unload something onto. "You're the one living with Cha Jihoon," she said, not a question. Folek blinked. "His name is Jihoon." Mrs. Han let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's the name he uses when he wants to be left alone." She lowered her voice, glancing toward the door like the walls themselves might be listening. 10 years ago, this whole street belonged to men who didn't care who they hurt to get what they wanted. Then one family put a stop to that. People don't forget something like that, even when the man responsible disappears for months at a time, pretending he's nobody. "Family," Folek repeated slowly. "What family?" But Mrs. Han had already said more than she meant to, and she waved the question away with her hand, suddenly very interested in restocking a shelf that didn't need restocking. Folek walked home with her rice and 100 new questions crowding out the ones she already had. She thought about the black car, the men who straightened up on the street, the package with a name that wasn't Jihoon. That night she found the framed photo, the one that had sat face down on the shelf since the day she arrived, untouched, unexplained. Jihoon was out, later than usual, and before she could stop herself, she turned it over. It was an older photograph, slightly faded. A group of men standing outside a building she didn't recognize, all dressed sharply, all clearly important in whatever room that photo had been taken in. Jihoon stood near the center, younger, harder-eyed, with none of the quiet patience she'd grown used to. And standing just beside him, one hand on his shoulder like they were old friends, was a face Folek would have recognized anywhere, in any photograph, in any lifetime. Her father. The rice bag slipped out of her hand and hit the floor. She was still staring at the photograph, trying to force the two pieces of her life into some kind of shape that made sense, when she heard the front door open behind her, and Jihoon's voice, low and careful, say the one thing she hadn't expected to hear yet. "I was hoping I'd get to tell you that myself, before you found it." Folek didn't move, didn't speak. The photograph was still in her hands, and her father's face was still looking up at her from a moment in his life she'd never known existed. Jihoon closed the door behind him slowly, like sudden movement might make things worse than they already were. "Folek. You knew him," her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "You knew my father." He didn't deny it. He didn't do anything except walk further into the room and sit down across from her, like he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, and none of the versions had felt right until now. "Adebyo Bankal," he said quietly, "saved my life before you were even born." The room went very still. 15 years ago, I was nobody important yet, just a young man trying to survive in a business that eats people who aren't careful. I made an enemy of the wrong person. He wanted me gone, and he had the men to make that happen. Your father was doing business in Seoul that month, completely unconnected to any of it. He didn't have to help me. He had every reason to stay out of it and let it happen. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. But he hid me in his hotel room for 2 nights until it was safe to move, and he never told anyone, not the men hunting me, not his own people back home. He asked for nothing in return. He just said everyone deserves one person who chooses to do the right thing when it costs them something. Folek's eyes were wet now, but she didn't wipe them away. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wasn't sure you'd believe I bought you for the reason I actually did. He looked at her directly for the first time since he'd walked in. I heard what happened to your father's company after he died. I heard what his wife did to his name, and eventually what she was doing to his daughter. I'd been trying to find a way to help without insulting what he'd have wanted, some quiet way to make sure his daughter never had to struggle the way I did. I didn't expect the day I finally found you to be the same day she decided to sell you over a pizza. So this was never about me needing somewhere to go. Her voice cracked. This was a debt. I was a debt you were paying off. It started that way. He shook his head slowly. It didn't stay that way, not for a long time now. She wanted to believe him. Some small, cautious part of her already did, but the bigger part of her was still reeling from the fact that the man she'd fallen for over 2 quiet months had walked into her life with an agenda he'd never once mentioned. There's more, Ji-hoon said, and something in his tone made the hair on her arms rise. The man who tried to have me killed 15 years ago, he's still alive, still in this city, and the cars you've been seeing outside this house, they're not mine. Folek felt the floor tilt slightly under her. What does that mean? It means somebody knows you're living here. He stood, moving toward the window, checking the street below with the kind of practiced caution that told her this wasn't the first time he'd done it. And it means whoever's watching this house isn't watching it because of who I used to be to your father. Then why? He turned back to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Folek saw something close to fear behind his eyes. Because they've figured out exactly who I am now, and they know that hurting you is the fastest way to hurt me. Ji-hoon didn't sleep that night, and neither did Folek. She sat by the window long after he'd told her to stay away from it, watching the empty street like it might answer the questions he hadn't finished answering. Somewhere out there was a man who'd spent 15 years waiting for the right moment to finish what he'd started, and now that moment had a face attached to it. Hers. By morning, the house had changed. 2 men she didn't recognize were posted near the gate, quiet and alert in a way that had nothing to do with hospitality. Ji-hoon introduced them simply as people I trust, which told her everything and nothing at once. You're not going to the laundry shop today, he said, not as a request. I have a shift. Not anymore. He said it gently, but there was no room to argue in it. Not until I know exactly how much danger you're actually in. She wanted to be angry about the sudden loss of the one small piece of independence she'd built for herself in this new life. Instead, she just felt cold. Tell me who he is, the man who wants you gone. Ji-hoon was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much of this to hand her. His name is Seo Kang-di. 15 years ago, he ran the Western District before I took it from him, not violently, not the way people assume. I simply built something people trusted more than they trusted him, and eventually his own people stopped following orders that didn't make sense anymore. He lost everything because of it. Territory, money, respect. His expression darkened. Men like that don't forgive losing, they wait. And now he knows about me. Now he knows you're the one thing in this world I've let myself care about since I lost the ability to care about anything safely. He looked at her, and for once there was no calculation behind it, just plain honesty. That makes you valuable to him, not because of who your father was, because of what you mean to me. If you were Folek right now, finding out the man you fell for wasn't just hiding a fortune, but hiding an enemy who's been waiting 15 years for exactly this kind of opening, would you run, or would you stay and face it with him? Drop your answer below. I really want to know what you do here, and if this story's got you hooked already, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss where this goes next. Because it was about to get a lot more dangerous before it got any better. 2 days passed in tense quiet. Then, on the third evening, one of Jihoon's men found something taped to the inside of the gate, a torn photograph of Folek, taken from a distance, at the laundry shop, dated the same week she'd started noticing the cars outside the house. Scrawled across the back in careful handwriting was a single line, "I know exactly what she's worth to you now." Jihoon read it twice, his face unreadable in a way that frightened Folek more than actual anger would have. "He's not just watching anymore," he said quietly. "He's telling us he could have taken you already and chose not to. That's not mercy." He folded the photograph and put it in his pocket like something too dangerous to leave lying around. "That's a warning." "A warning for what?" Jihoon met her eyes, and for the first time since the pizza box and the gate and the life she'd walked away from, Folek watched real fear settle onto his face, not for himself, but for her. For whatever he's planning to do next. The attack came on a Tuesday, in the kind of ordinary afternoon light that made everything that happened next feel even more wrong. Folek had finally convinced Jihoon to let her go back to the laundry shop, arguing that hiding inside the house made her feel more like a prisoner than the day she'd first walked through its gate. He'd agreed on one condition. One of his men, a quiet, broad-shouldered younger man named Seok-min, would walk 2 steps behind her the entire way there and back. She'd almost forgotten about the danger by the time she reached the shop. Almost. The smell of clean linen and steam had a way of making the world feel smaller and safer than it actually was, and for an hour folding towels beside Mrs. O, the shop owner, Folek let herself pretend her life was simple again. Then the front bell rang, and 3 men walked in who had no interest in laundry. Seok-min was on his feet before Folek fully registered what was happening, his body already angling between her and the door. "Get to the back room," he said, low and fast. "Now." She didn't move fast enough. One of the men, older, heavyset, with a long scar tracing down one side of his jaw, locked eyes with her across the shop floor, and something about the way he smiled made her stomach drop before he'd even said a word. "You must be her," he said, almost pleasantly. "Kangdi's been very curious about you." Seok-min's hand moved toward his jacket, but the man raised a single finger, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. "Let's not do anything that gets someone hurt in a laundry shop full of witnesses." His eyes slid back to Folek. "Just a message today. Tell your chairman that the next time we come, we won't be this polite." They left as calmly as they'd entered, and it took nearly a full minute after the bell above the door stopped ringing for Folek's hands to stop shaking. Jihoon arrived within 20 minutes of Seok-min's call, and Folek had never seen him move the way he moved walking into that shop, controlled fury, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice to be terrifying. He checked her over with his hands on her shoulders, her face, searching for any mark those men might have left, and when he found none, the relief that crossed his face was almost as frightening as the anger had been. "I'm fine," she told him. "He didn't touch me." "He didn't have to touch you." Jihoon's voice was tight. "He wanted me to know he could have." That night back at the house, the quiet peace they'd built over 2 months had completely dissolved into something tense and watchful. More men arrived, not the 2 from before, but nearly a dozen, filling the small courtyard with the low murmur of Korean Folek couldn't fully follow, though she understood the tone well enough. Preparation, war, or the beginning of one. She found Jihoon alone in the kitchen near midnight, staring at nothing, a cup of tea gone cold in front of him. "I keep thinking," he said quietly, not looking up, "that if I hadn't gone looking for you, none of this would be touching your life right now. You'd still be trapped in that house, but at least you'd be safe from him." "Safe," Folek repeated, sitting down across from him. "Is that really what you think that life was? Safe?" It was predictable misery. This, he gestured vaguely at the courtyard full of armed men outside the window, "this could get you killed." "You didn't put a target on my back, Jihoon. Kangdi did. Comfort did, the day she decided a pizza was worth more than her own husband's daughter." Her voice hardened. "I'm done being something bad things just happen to. If this man wants to use me to hurt you, then I want to understand exactly what we are facing, not be shielded from it in some room upstairs while you decide my life for me." Jihoon looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, surprise, maybe, or the particular kind of respect that comes from being told the truth by someone he'd been trying to protect from it. "Kangdi won't come to us directly," he said finally. "That's not how he thinks. He'll try to isolate one of us first, cut off support, create doubt, make it look like staying close to me is more dangerous than leaving." He paused. "He tried something similar 15 years ago, right before your father hid me. He goes after the people closest to his target before he ever comes for the target himself. Then we don't let him isolate anyone." Folake reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "We stay exactly where we are, together." For the first time since the photograph fell out of its frame, Jihoon almost smiled. "Your father said something very similar to me once, word for word, almost." Outside, the courtyard lights flickered once, then steadied, and somewhere beyond the gate, in the dark, Kangdi's men were already moving their next piece into place. The isolation didn't come the way Jihoon expected. It came through Seokmin. 3 days after the laundry shop, Jihoon received word that his most trusted lieutenant, a man who'd been with him since before the takeover of the Western District, a man Jihoon had vouched for personally more times than he could count, had gone quiet. No check-ins, no answer on any line, just silence where there should have been a steady, reliable presence. They found his car abandoned near the docks, keys still in the ignition, no sign of a struggle, no sign of him at all. Jihoon's face, when he got the call, went pale in a way Folake hadn't seen since the night of the photograph. He wouldn't disappear like this, he said, almost to himself. Not without a message, not without something. The message came an hour later, delivered by a boy no older than 14 who'd been paid to hand an envelope to anyone standing outside the gate and run. Inside was a single photograph, Seokmin, bound, bruised, but alive, sitting in a room Folake didn't recognize. Written on the back, in the same careful handwriting as before, one of yours for one of hers. Bring the girl to the old shipping yard by midnight, alone, or he doesn't come home. The house went completely silent. "No," Jihoon said immediately, before anyone else could speak. "Absolutely not." "He's your man," Folake said quietly. "He's suffering because of what happened to me. He's suffering because Kangdi is a coward who goes after the people around me instead of coming at me directly." Jihoon's hands were shaking, something she'd never seen from him before. "I am not trading you for him. I'll find another way." "There is no other way, and you know it." Folake stood, forcing steadiness into her voice she didn't fully feel. "If I don't go, that man dies for nothing, tonight, because of a decision that isn't even his to be punished for. I won't be the reason for that. And if you go, I lose you instead." His voice cracked on the last word, the first real crack she'd seen in him since the day they'd met. "Do you understand that? Kangdi isn't going to let you walk back out of that shipping yard. This isn't a trade. It's a trap, and you're the bait he's been waiting 15 years to set." "Then don't let it be a trap." Folake held his gaze, steady despite the fear coiled tight in her chest. "Set your own." It took hours of arguing, planning, and Jihoon packing the length of the kitchen, more times than Folake could count before he finally agreed, not to sending her alone, but to a version of the plan that put men in place around the shipping yard long before midnight, hidden in the shadows of the containers, watching every angle Kangdi might use. "If anything goes wrong," Jihoon said, gripping her shoulders, his eyes searching hers with something between desperation and grief. "If there is even 1 second where this doesn't go exactly as we've planned it." "It will," she said, though she didn't fully believe it herself, "because we're not doing this the way he expects." Midnight came cold and clear, the shipping yard lit only by scattered floodlights and the distant glow of the harbor beyond it. Folake walked in exactly as instructed, alone, hands visible, heart hammering so hard she was certain the men watching from the container shadows could hear it. Kangdi was waiting near the center of the yard, flanked by 2 men, Seokmin kneeling and bound beside him, a fresh bruise darkening one side of his face. "You actually came," Kangdi said, almost admiringly. brave or foolish. With your father's family, it was always hard to tell the difference. Let him go, Foleg said, keeping her voice level. That was the deal. The deal, Kangdi repeated slowly, was that you'd come alone. His eyes lifted past her shoulder, scanning the darkness beyond the containers with the practiced suspicion of a man who'd survived exactly this kind of betrayal before. And yet I don't feel alone right now, do you? Foleg's blood went cold. Kangdi smiled, slow and satisfied, and raised one hand into the air, a signal. And from every direction at once, the shipping yard erupted into motion. The floodlights caught everything in harsh, flickering bursts, shapes moving between containers, shouts in Korean cutting through the cold air, the unmistakable crack of a gunshot somewhere off to Foleg's left that made her drop instinctively to the ground before her mind had even finished processing what the sound was. Jihoon's men moved fast, faster than Kangdi had clearly accounted for, closing in from angles he hadn't expected anyone to be watching. But Kangdi hadn't survived 15 years in this world by walking into traps unprepared either. His own men emerged from behind a row of containers on the far side of the yard, more than Foleg had realized were there. And for a few terrifying seconds, the whole yard dissolved into chaos she couldn't make sense of. She crawled towards Seokmin, who was still bound, struggling against the ropes at his wrists, with the kind of desperate urgency of a man trying to make himself useful in a fight he couldn't currently join. "Stay down," he hissed at her, even as he twisted, trying to shield her with what little of his body he could move. "Please, just stay down." She didn't listen. She couldn't. Her fingers found the knot at his wrists and worked at it with shaking hands while the world exploded in noise around them. And somewhere in the chaos, she heard Jihoon's voice, not calm anymore, not controlled, just raw and desperate, calling her name like it was the only word he had left. "Foleg." She looked up just in time to see Kangdi himself closing the distance toward her, a gun raised, his earlier amusement completely gone, replaced by the flat, furious focus of a man who just watched 15 years of careful patience collapse in front of him. "You should have come alone," he said, and there was nothing pleasant left in his voice at all. Jihoon reached him first. What happened in the next several seconds would replay in Foleg's mind for a long time afterward, Jihoon's body colliding with Kangdi's, the gun skittering across the concrete, the two of them grappling in the harsh light, while Foleg finally freed Seokmin's wrists, and both of them scrambled backward, out of the immediate line of danger. It wasn't a clean fight. It wasn't the kind of confrontation Foleg had built up in her mind on the walk to the shipping yard, some inevitable moment where Jihoon's control and composure won out effortlessly. It was ugly and desperate and close, both men bleeding, both men fighting like the outcome genuinely wasn't decided yet, because it wasn't. Kangdi landed a blow that sent Jihoon sprawling, and for one heart-stopping second, Foleg was certain she was about to watch the worst possible ending to this night unfold in front of her. Kangdi reached for the fallen gun. Foleg moved before she could think better of it, closing the distance and slamming her whole body against him just as his fingers closed around the weapon, throwing off his aim, buying Jihoon exactly the half-second he needed to recover. It was enough. Jihoon was on his feet again, and this time when the fight ended, it ended decisively, Kangdi on the ground, disarmed, surrounded by Jihoon's men who'd finally overwhelmed the last of his own, the gunfire fading into an eerie, ringing silence across the yard. Kangdi, bloodied and pinned, looked up at Jihoon with something that might have been respect if it hadn't been buried under so much bitterness. "Your father figure protected you once," he spat, glancing toward Foleg. "And now his daughter does the same. Some debts really do follow a person their whole life." "This one ends tonight," Jihoon said quietly. "All of it. You don't come near her again. You don't come near anyone I care about again. Whatever's left of your operation after tonight, keep it far away from mine, or there won't be a third warning." It wasn't mercy, exactly. It was something colder and more final, the kind of ending that men like Kangdi understood better than kindness ever could. Later, sitting on the edge of a police vehicle that had arrived only after everything meaningful had already happened, Wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, Folek watched Jihoon speak quietly with Seokmin, checking every inch of him for injuries with the same careful attention he'd once used on her outside the laundry shop. When he finally walked over to her, there was blood on his knuckles and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. But the moment his eyes met hers, something in his expression cracked open completely, relief so total it looked almost like grief. "You weren't supposed to be in the middle of that," he said, kneeling in front of her. "I wasn't going to just watch," she said simply. "Not you, not Seokmin, not anymore." He reached up and gently touched the side of her face, checking for injuries she didn't have, his hand trembling slightly against her skin. "Your father would have done exactly what you just did tonight. I should have known better than to think you wouldn't." Above them, the first hint of dawn was starting to break over the harbor, pale and quiet after a night that had nearly cost them everything. And for the first time since the pizza box and the gate and the life she'd walked away from without looking back, Folek let herself believe that whatever came next, it wouldn't be something either of them had to face alone. The morning after the fight at the shipping yard, Folek woke up to something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. No footsteps outside the house. No strange cars waiting across the street. No messages from unknown numbers. No reason to wonder whether someone was watching her. For the first time since she had left her stepmother's house, she could breathe without wondering what would happen next. Kangdi was finished. His men had scattered, his operation had been broken apart, and the police had enough evidence from the shipping yard to keep him away from Folek and Jihoon for a very long time. But the biggest change wasn't what happened to Kangdi. It was what had happened to Folek. Months earlier, she had stood at a gate with one small bag because the woman who was supposed to protect her had decided she was worth a pizza. Now she stood in front of her own clothing store, holding the keys in her hand. Her name was on the sign. Not her father's. Not Jihoon's. Hers. She had built it slowly, refusing to let Jihoon simply hand her a business and call it a gift. He helped when she needed guidance, introduced her to people who understood the industry, and opened doors she didn't know existed. But she made the decisions. She chose the designs. She hired the workers. She signed the contracts. And every time she looked around that store, she remembered the girl who once believed she had to earn the right to be treated with kindness. That girl was gone. One afternoon, Folek received a message from Zainab. She almost ignored it. Then she opened it. Her stepsister didn't apologize for everything. She didn't suddenly become a different person. But she admitted something Folek had never heard from her before. "I was jealous of you." Folek stared at the screen for a long time. Zainab had spent years believing Folek was taking something from her simply by existing. Her father's attention, her place in the family, the love she thought belonged only to her. It didn't excuse what she had done. But Folek finally understood that she didn't need to carry Zainab's bitterness anymore. She deleted the message. Not because she hated her. Because she was done letting the past decide how much space it occupied in her life. That evening, Jihoon came home and found Folek sitting at the kitchen table. He placed 2 cups of tea down. "You're quiet." "I'm thinking." "That's dangerous." She laughed. "Very funny." He sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Folek reached across the table and took his hand. "Do you remember the first night I came here?" Jihoon smiled. "You were terrified. I thought you were going to hurt me. I thought you were going to leave. I almost did." "I know." She looked at him. "And now?" Jihoon squeezed her hand. "Now I hope you never do." Her eyes filled with tears. She had spent so much of her life being afraid that people would leave her. Now she was finally with someone who wanted her to stay. Not because he owned her. Not because he had rescued her. Because he loved her. Folake leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. I love you. I love you too. And that was how the woman who had once been sold for a pizza finally got the ending nobody in that house had expected. She didn't become valuable because she married Seoul's most powerful mafia boss. She didn't become important because he protected her. She became powerful the moment she stopped believing the people who told her she was worthless. And Jihoon didn't need to save her anymore. He simply stood beside her while she built the life she had always deserved. Sometimes the people who hurt you think they've ended your story. They don't realize they may have just pushed you toward the chapter where you finally discover who you are. Comfort thought she had gotten rid of Folake for the price of a pizza. She had no idea that the woman walking through that gate would one day have everything she tried to take away from her. Her freedom, her confidence, her own success, and the love of a man who chose her without needing to own her. So tell me honestly, if you were Folake, would you have forgiven your stepmother after everything she did? And would you have trusted Jihoon after discovering that the homeless man you thought you knew was actually Seoul's feared mafia boss? Let me know in the comments. And if you stayed with Folake from that first pizza box all the way to this moment, make sure you subscribe, because there are more stories coming where the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the one nobody can break. Because sometimes the person they throw away becomes the person they wish they had never betrayed.